Hitchens, he wrote a piece for The Spectator a while ago, which you might have come across, which is quite fun, where he went to the fastest growing church in Britain and he went to the fastest declining church in Britain, and kind of gave them both a go on Sunday. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but the fastest growing church was some sort of, I think, Pentecostal African church in London. Very raucous style of worship, people deeply involved in the community, very kind of an all-encompassing church community, which demanded a lot of people and was quite theologically conservative. And then the other church was, I think, Unitarian, or it was basically, the difference was that it was extraordinarily liberal, asked nothing of people, was very politically progressive, and kind of hard to distinguish from just a meeting of the Green Party, to be honest, right? The point he was highlighting, and I know this is true in the UK, I don't know this is true elsewhere, is that actually the churches that are best at getting people through the door are actually churches which are the most demanding of people and often the most rigid and the most like the sort of the stronger source, right, actually is more attractive, it seems, at least in contemporary Britain. Is that something that we see elsewhere as well?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, one of the interesting changes in the United States is not just the growth of the evangelical movement in recent years, but also some of the reasons why people turned away from the more established Protestant churches. So David Hollinger, an American historian, has a very interesting book called Christianity's American Fate, How Religion Became More Conservative, a Society More Secular. And that's interesting for a lot. I mean, it's a very interesting book, partly because what it does is provide a much more nuanced picture to the one that you commonly hear, which is that the evangelical churches have, in some sense, hijacked Christianity in the pursuit of a very conservative political agenda. Large parts of the story are, of course, true, but Hollinger makes a very interesting additional point that part of the reason why the establishment Protestant churches declined was that they actually undertook an exercise that was perceived by many of their members as a hijacking of Christianity for political ends, but in this case, progressive ends. So he looks at the way in which, in the 1920s and 1930s in particular, the leading establishment Protestant churches in the United States became very involved in two things. One was progressive politics in America, and the other, which was part of the same sort of thought process, was international missionary activity. And very often the people who became the most progressive forces in America were people who'd been missionaries to parts of the world, China, India, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and who had gone out with a rather old-fashioned, somewhat imperial civilizing mission, and who'd come back with a much more complex view of the societies they were seeing, and in particular, no longer believed in the idea that it was the mission of American Christianity to spread a superior ideology to the rest of the world, but were coming back and saying, actually, the rest have something to teach us. The individuals who were convinced by that process, one can understand and sympathize with them, with their thought process, but what it looks like to the standard churchgoer in a Presbyterian or a Unitarian church back in the US was that suddenly a bunch of liberal pastors were trying to drag the congregation in a direction not all of them were sure they wanted to go. And a lot of them then moved to the evangelical church, where, of course, many of them then ended up finding a political home some way to the right. And, of course, many people in evangelical churches then objected to the fact that their churches were trying to take them further right than they wanted. But what's interesting, I think, about that story is that any church which forgets that it's first and foremost a community and tries to use the captive presence of that community as a vehicle for the ideological convictions of a subset of its members who are the pastors or the priests or the imams or whatever, is to lose the respect and loyalty of that community. And that's true whether it's hijacked in a rightward direction or whether it's hijacked in a leftward direction. So the story, I think, much more recently in the United States has been about many churches trying to sort of doing deals with politicians on the right. And I think that is part of the reason why why there's been a big increase in the so-called nuns and the people in America who are spiritual but not committed to a particular movement. But we forget at our peril that it's not a particular vice of the political right. There have been periods in history, and I think the interwar years and the early post-war years were a period in which it was much more the left that was doing that, and it was doing that at the expense of the sense of community, the more established churches like the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians and the Unitarians and so on. And that was reasons why they lost their market share, as we economists would rather the Philistine put it.
Yeah,